Hey there, I'm Rachel, and I help educators switch to teaching online and transition to a location-independent lifestyle. This video is all about how to teach on an online teacher marketplace, or as I call them, create a profile platforms. The reason why I call them this is that all teachers create their profile, which is your chance to really try and sell yourself and your teaching services to prospective students. I started teaching on one of these platforms about a year ago. I wasn't new to teaching English online as I had started with VIPKid back in 2016, but I was so intimidated by the idea of creating my own lessons and setting my own price. And this is what I hear from other online teachers. And now that all the China-based platforms that provide curriculum are going away, I want to share what I've learned about teaching on a creator profile platform. So I'm going to be giving you some tips about the mindset that you need to adopt, setting up your profile, planning your classes, and keeping all of your students organized. If you'd like to see a full list of online teaching platforms outside of China, check out my last video about online platforms outside of China. Just click the link that appears in one of these corners. Okay, now let's dive in. So here's the mindset you need to adopt. On the creative profile platforms, think of yourself as an English language service provider, a coach rather than a teacher. The most important thing is that your students feel like they're meeting their language learning goals. As long as the student is happy and satisfied, you'll get good reviews, which is what will keep your schedule full and new students flowing into it. All students have the chance to rate their teachers on creative profile platforms. It's what helps prospective students make an informed decision when choosing a teacher. I personally don't think there's any reason to get a bad review on these platforms if you approach it more like a coach rather than a teacher in a traditional school setting. So, in my experience, there are two different types of students: those who know what they want and they come into the lesson with specific goals, and those who just want to improve with no set plan as to how that happens. So the platform, the creative profile platform that I teach on is called Langu, L-A-N-G-U, like language. And I had two particular students on that platform. One was, his name's Sebastian, and he only wants speaking practice. I have tried preparing lessons and he has appeased me by going through the lesson. But then at the end of it, he's like, you know, these lessons are great, but it's late for me. I've had a long day and I really just want to practice my speaking. So now I will send him worksheets to do as homework if he has time. And that way he is empowered to make the decision himself. And when he does have time to do the worksheets, then we go over it together in his next class. Otherwise, we just chat. And Jacek is another student, and he just wants help with his writing. He's preparing for a military English proficiency exam, and he is specifically focusing on the writing portion. But he just translates, he thinks about it in his native language, which is Polish, and then just translates that directly to English. And that doesn't really work out that well. So we spend our lessons just, I go through and he finds prompts and then he writes essays and I go through and correct his writing. And one day I finally suggested that we practice speaking and suggested that that would help his writing improve. And I could just see the light bulb go off. And at that point, he knew he could trust me and seemed excited to know that there was another way to improve his writing. And these are just two examples of my own experience giving students what they want rather than what I think they need. Even more important than these things you can do to make your students happy is making sure you're attracting the right students in the first place. And that is done with your profile. The purpose of your profile The purpose of your profile is to attract the right students and repel the wrong ones. When you try to appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. And this old adage really applies here. Your vibe attracts your tribe. You want to attract students that vibe with you and have something in common. Now, you're not always going to be able to achieve this. I have had a few students that weren't very receptive to what I was trying to teach them, and getting through the lessons was a little difficult. And I thought to myself, why did you choose me as your teacher? But most of my students have read everything in my profile and watched my video and decided, yes, I resonate with this and I want Rachel to be my teacher because I'm interested in these things too. Another reason why attracting the right students is important is because it'll be easier to encourage and inspire them, which will motivate them to leave good reviews without you even needing to ask. So if you have a particular passion or a hobby, then you should talk about that in your intro video and write it in your bio. My profile on Langu is all about my digital nomad lifestyle, travel, and running an online business. And this helped me get my first student on Langu. She's an older lady from Poland and her daughter is grown. So she decided she wanted to be a digital nomad. So she enrolled in a graphic design course and put her house on the market. And then she found me on Langu and chose me because I have experience as a digital nomad. You should also use your profile as a way to manage your prospective students' expectations. It's always better to underpromise and overdeliver. Don't do the opposite. For example, when I first joined the Langu platform as a teacher, I advertised that my lessons primarily focused on speaking and conversation, but I would plan out other exercises to focus on grammar and reading, vocabulary, or listening. And this was just a surprise and delight for most students, and it kept them coming back for more. Don't promise on your profile that you're going to help someone land a job at a Fortune 500 company or something like that, unless you really can do that. One of your goals as the ESL coach is to surprise and delight and give your students the best experience possible. And don't just focus on what you can do as a teacher, focus on how it's going to help them and their transition as a language learner. So for example, my profile says, I help you practice your spoken English so you can travel independently. So you want to help them visualize what it'll look like on the other side of your lessons together. Now, part of your job as a coach is to keep the motivation high and keep them feeling encouraged rather than discouraged. One of the ways to do this is by using the flipped classroom method. I've seen this method utilized by many companies with a high level of success. This is the method that Wall Street English uses, and that's where I taught in Beijing when I lived there. And it's also the method that VIPKid uses. The flipped classroom method is where the student self-studies the lesson material before class, so they're familiar with it. Then you become more of a facilitator in class, someone who is there to answer questions and correct pronunciation. This works better than trying to introduce new information during the lesson. It also helps to empower them. In the case of Sebastian, he was able to do the worksheets outside of class where he had time to really think about it. Then he came to class ready with questions, and this gave him more confidence in his English abilities. So now let's talk about how to plan your lessons. There are two ways to plan your lessons. The first is to plan them yourself from scratch. And all you need to do this is to just follow a basic template. And so the 4 steps to planning a lesson are: choose a lesson topic, make a vocabulary list, create sentences so they can see how to use it, then plan some activities to help them implement the target language. Be sure that the lesson content is appropriate for the student's level. My advice is to familiarize yourself with the CEFR, which stands for the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And this is the standardized language levels of language. There are six. A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. Basically the A levels, that's beginner, and B level is intermediate, C level is advanced. The second way to plan your classes is to use online resources, and I'm going to introduce you to some of my favorites in this video. These are also great websites if you just need some inspiration when you're planning your lessons from scratch, or you don't have the time to plan everything from scratch. So here are some of the websites that I'll be talking about: Busy Teacher, Lingua House, OneStop English, and Off to Class. So the first one is called Busy Teacher. They have tons of worksheets for all ages, as well as articles and tools to make fun things like puzzles and word searches. The next one is Lingua House, and this is the one that I use. It has hundreds of lesson topics, and all of them come with a PDF and a teacher's key. They cover all the bases from vocabulary, grammar, and activities. They're based on lots of different things like articles, breaking news stories, videos, and I also love that they have some developed curriculums. It saves me tons of time. They have several worksheets available for free, but there's also a paid option that unlocks them all. Next is OneStop English. It's similar to Lingua House, but they have lessons geared towards kids, teenagers, and adults, whereas Lingua House is just primarily for adults. Rather than the formatted PDFs that you get from Lingua House, the lessons in OneStop English are more of an outline, and it's up to you to format it either into a PDF or a presentation of some sort. But this gives you more creative control. They also have a subscription plan that unlocks all of their resources, but you can find several things for free. The last one is a bit more high tech. It's called Off to Class, and it's fancy. I've only done a little bit of research, so I won't be able to tell you everything it does, but the stuff I've learned about so far is pretty awesome. It gives the student control over the placement tests, lessons, and assessments. It comes with classroom materials, curriculum, homework, and assessments, placement tests, and even data. This is definitely the most expensive resource, but it does have a free option. And if I just want to comment about your rates, because you can set your own rates, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but you could take this into consideration, paying for these resources, and kind of include that a bit in your rates. So that's just something to consider. Now, once your schedule really starts to fill in, keeping track of your students can be tricky. So here's the system that I started using. I created a spreadsheet for each individual student in Google Drive that includes their name, job, what package they bought, the lesson they did, the dates, and any notes. This is hugely helpful with implementing the flipped classroom method, which is when, as I pointed out before, the student self-studies before the class, so they're not trying to absorb new information. So I am going to switch away from these slides quickly and show you my spreadsheet so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So I just made it in Google Drive, and here's an example. So each student has their own sheet, so it's easier to plan and keep track of what we've done. So I've got their name, their job, the package they bought, the topic of the lesson that we did, the date, and any notes from the lesson. And this is also where I include links for myself that I send them to access audio and video and things like that. And if you look down here at the bottom, these are all of my different students, and they each have their own sheet so that it helps me stay organized. Okay, so now the last couple of things I want to talk about, I have some tips for setting your own rate. And the biggest piece of advice I can give you is charge what you're worth. Take into account all of your credentials and experience. Don't charge a lower rate just because you see other teachers on the platform doing it. You have to think about it from the student's perspective. A higher rate gives them a higher perceived value, which means that they will then take it more seriously. I made the mistake of setting my rate too low. Langu makes it really easy for you to offer packages. And when I first got started, I set my rate too low. And what I realized is that students would buy a package, do one or two of the lessons, and decide it wasn't for them or they didn't have time, and then just not take the other lessons, which is what has to happen in order for me to get the money. My guess is that they decided, oh, I didn't pay much for these lessons, so I'm just going to cut my losses because it's not for me. So you definitely want to take these things into account when setting your rates. Okay, so if you need some extra help during this time, I have a few things to offer you. I have an online course called Teaching for Freedom that dives deeper into these concepts and so much more. There are lessons with video walkthroughs of several online teaching platforms outside of China. There are also video lessons on how to transition into a location-independent lifestyle. It's not normally open to the public, but I have publicly opened it for enrollment for a limited time, given the announcement and new regulations from China that's got so many teachers scrambling to figure out something else. You can find a link down in the description below the video if you'd like to learn more. And I also offer private one-on-one coaching that includes lifetime access to Teaching for Freedom, several one-on-one strategy calls, and direct messaging access for any time you get stuck. Or you can simply download these slides and keep them and refer back to them as you apply to these online teacher marketplaces. So there's a link also to download these slides down in the description. It will put you on my email list, where I send out almost weekly newsletters with tips for teaching English online, digital nomad life, and travel tips. You can always unsubscribe at any time, but I would hope that you'd like to stick around. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Drop any questions in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.